Hey everyone, this is your week 6 summary video, and 2 weeks to go. 75% of the way through the course. Unbelievable. Um, really have been enjoying the discussion boards, all of them, this particular course. This week was pretty interesting as we got involved with the discussion of whether Old Testament laws that God had brought in for Israel um, should be applied to modern society, to our areas today. And many of you, all of you, really had some excellent responses and discussions on this. And David, in his discussion, we were going back and forth a little bit on this, and many of you pointed out that Christ is the fulfillment of the law, and yet, as I've discussed with David a little bit in his, if you want to read that, you can. If not, I'll chat a little bit about it. But in today's society, in today's church, we often quote Old Testament law as the reason why certain things in society should not be. And yet, on others, we say, well, that was for then, not for now. And how do we then logically and theologically think through these issues? One of the things I mentioned to David was, look at the I know it wasn't an Old Testament, New Testament thing, but look at the criteria for an elder that we have, that Paul talks about in the New Testament. I don't have the scripture in front of me right here, but an elder is supposed to be the husband, husband of one wife, and this, and a list of things, including, one that's full of hospitality and that is not a glutton. And yet, how many of us know fat, to say it, elders and deacons and pastors? But they don't meet the criteria established in the New Testament. Well, but Kevin, there's things like, there's obesity that's caused by diabetes or by genetics, or there's also obesity created by eating too many M&Ms and potato chips and everything else, and unhealthy eating. So we have all these things. How do we think through them? I think when the Pharisees came to Jesus and said, we got him now. We're gonna trap him. Which of the 10 commandments is the greatest of them all? And Jesus basically said, listen, all the law can be summed up in just 2. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, and your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. In those 2, all the law is summarized. And all the law was not just the Decalogue, not just the 10 commandments, but the hundreds of special laws that were written to explain what was there. And so, what do we do with that? In today's church, we're dealing with transsexuals. We're dealing with the lesbian, gay, LGBT community. We're dealing with homosexuality in, what if we're celibate, but we feel a pull to that? How do we deal with all this stuff in today's society? Well, in the Old Testament, we could say, well, let's bring the Old Testament law in. That was an abomination to God. I don't doubt it. But also an abomination to God, it wasn't actually quoted that way, but if your son or your daughter were to cuss at you, you were to take them outside the camp and stone them to death. We don't do that anymore. That would be child abuse. And yet some of the law we want to conveniently apply, whereas some of it we decide not to. And so where do we fit? This is where critical thinking, critical analysis comes into play. Calmer heads, if you will come into play. Not only the critical analysis, but a good understanding of the theological interpretation of scriptures needs to apply as well. I know when I was in Bible school, it was a quick little, ditty, if you will. But what I was taught in Bible school was that if a law made it through the Old Testament and into the New Testament, then it is applicable today. If it didn't, it stays with the old. All right? Plural marriage was allowed in the Old Testament. Was it God's original intent? Probably not, because it was Adam and Eve. He didn't make, Adam and Eve, Jill and Jane. And so it was probably there, but he allowed it for a time. And yet today, and in the New Testament, we see we should be, married to one wife, one husband. The husband-wife relationship is a marriage, and it's a different thing. And there is no understanding of accepting homosexuality in the New Testament. But there is the edict of loving your neighbor as yourself. And rather than burn him at the stake, how do I treat the homosexual in my midst? How do I deal with the person who has tendencies towards members of the same sex and yet is trying to stay celibate and honor God in their life? How do we deal with that? So this is where the critical thinking, the logical thinking, the theological thinking has to come into play so that calmer heads can prevail. Excellent job, you guys. I really appreciate it. Week 7 is coming up, and in week 7 you'll be continuing to read Stone and Duke's book, the second half of it. You'll also do another evaluation of their work, and you'll be looking at a situational analysis as well, pitting the or situational analysis with something that you have been through or are familiar with, and applying the analysis and then evaluating it based on, as the assignment says, on a theological perspective. So we're trying to help you to understand and apply something in that. You're also reading a critical thinking in everyday life, 9 strategies, an article, a PDF article that's in this week, and apply those or look at them from your own perspective. Which of the 9 strategies, a couple of them, do you really feel will help you, and why? Don't just say they will help me, but the question says, and why? And make sure that you find a weakness, not a weakness, but one that would be least beneficial in your opinion to yourself, and why. And for the analysis of the Stone and Duke's book work, I don't have my computer in front of me, but I thought we were doing that this week as well. Kind of analyze, or maybe that was this week, week 6. I don't know. I'm confused. Make sure that you apply and you mention a weakness from the book that you felt the authors had. A couple of you didn't do that with the first assignment. That's right, it was assignment 6. So make sure you've caught that before you submit that this week. Anyway, God bless. Take care. Just doing fantastic. I really enjoying you guys. You guys are thinkers and theologians according to our definition, and you're doing a really nice job working through this course. So take care. God bless. We'll talk to you again next week. Bye-bye.